going faster doesn't always result in success. We have customers like Starbucks who are losing tens of millions of dollars each day that we're down. You can see the growth of the platform against the decline or diminished investment. That was eye-opening for us all, saying, hey, we went through a period of diminished investment, and that has now led to the fraying of our platform.
Welcome to LaunchPod, the show from LogRocket, where we sit down with top product and digital leaders. Today, we're talking with Jeremy Pollock, VP of Product at WP Engine. On this episode, we talk about why speed is the new moat. Jeremy is pushing PMs to use AI, ship code, and move fast, because in the AI era, slow teams fall behind for good. How WP Engine is enabling product teams to use AI through access, training, and best practices that turn weeks of work into hours. And how big, aspirational product goals create momentum, giving teams the motivation to eat their vegetables and tackle the foundational work required for long-term success. So here's our conversation with Jeremy Pollock. Jeremy, welcome to the show, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
This is going to be fun. I think we got a cool show today because you've had a cool experience. You're now at WP Engine, been there 3 years, VP of Product, through a very important time in just the web with AI and everything's moving. But looking back over your career, you spent time at Lightbend, PubNub. You had a whole interlude of being at Mashery and going through 2 acquisitions. You started out as a sales engineer, though. And I think all of this kind of rolls into a really neat way to talk about how the world has come full circle, right? You moved into product from being a sales engineer. You could be a little more hands-on. You could kind of do it yourself a bit more. And you ship some stuff, kind of as a product person very early on in doing stuff for yourself. But with AI, this is kind of the new expectation. And so I think that's kind of the real quick version of the story we have is learn to do it yourself. And then now that's a world that everyone has to do it themselves. So maybe we start from the beginning and just, you started out as a sales engineer and how'd you kind of get into product and what did that mean for your ability to self-service a bit?
Yeah, sure. And, I do this before I jump into that. I definitely, whenever I see like any tweets or X's or whatever we call them these days.
I still call them tweets.
Tweets are good. When they do a tweet about like, we don't need any more engineers. Clearly we need more engineers.
We always need more engineers.
Yeah, but I do like this spirit that's emerging as like, product managers having more influence, more control, more input into what's being built and how it's being built. And again, that's not about dictating code, but I just love this emergence of DIY type attitude within the product management community. And when I think about my first entry into product management 25 years ago, which sounds so crazy to say, but I was the know-it-all sales engineer for a small startup doing content management systems for technical documentation and other types of doc sets. We got acquired by this company called BrawVision, which is an early internet pioneer, serving massive sites out there in the early days of the internet, large-scale e-com sites like Sears, if you remember Sears.com at all, sites like that. I remember being on the phone with the product leader saying all the things I wanted to do with this product or what was wrong with this product. And he said, hey, why don't you come over to product management and start solving these problems? And once I got into PM, it was set it and forget it. I just love this notion of building solutions at scale for customers and solving complex problems. And it was born from not just the product management ethos of actually identifying important problems and coming up with solutions that deliver value. But for me, I've always been a developer myself. I've been coding since a long time, more than 25 years. I won't say the actual year since that will date me quite a bit, but I've always had, hands-on keyboard. And as I got into product management, especially at a company at BrawVision, where we're doing large scale platforms, this ability to kind of dig into the code and start using code to translate ideas into tangible pictures that would better represent my story or my vision, that really proved to be of great value to me. I remember first project at BrawVision where I kind of used this technique of illustrating the problem and the solution. We were trying to deliver a new integration framework into our portal technology. So think single pane of glass application that allows the user to get access to content and functionality scattered throughout an enterprise in third-party applications. There was a new standard that was emerging that would dictate how these portal technologies could expose third-party data and capabilities through the single pane of glass. The engineering team and I were having just challenging conversations. What does this mean? What does this mean to our product strategy? What does this mean to our users? How do we actually implement this standard? Because they don't give you the guidebook on how to do that. And that's when I just decided for some reason to roll up my sleeves, dig into I think at the time it was a servlet based application, so Java, and just did a rough proof of concept of how the standard could be applied within the context of our application and our customer base. And I still clearly remember the meeting today where the light bulbs you could see going off in the minds of the engineering team. We had a much more productive conversation. And just as important, I think it established credibility, my credibility with the team, that much more so. I was working on a developer platform. I was coming to them with a developer mindset as well. And that was just so much better received than coming in as a kind of a classic marketing person, no disrespect.
None taken.
With the PowerPoint that shows kind of like the vision, but doesn't speak to the tangibility of what we could actually do. And that technique has proven to be successful time and time again, albeit my main experience has been in the developer platform space. So this type of like developer focused ethos has paid off quite successfully. But as we transition into the world of AI, where you don't have to be as deeply experienced on the tech front as someone like myself, today with AI, you can use lots of great technologies out there, different LLMs, different development tools like Cursor, Lovable, you have Klein integrated into Visual Studio Code. You can really rapidly start to create these proofs of concepts that are clickable, that show your vision, show the problem space, and become a much more effective communication artifact or vehicle when interacting with everyone from engineers, but also to customers and even executive stakeholders.
No, it is interesting because you bring it up. You saw the light go off when you showed something, clickable, usable. It was not production ready by any means, but they could touch it. They could see it. They could kind of grasp it. And everyone communicates differently. And I feel like I've run into several people and several really intelligent, smart, really, really productive people who just have trouble sometimes envisioning, if it's not their vision, envisioning the step you're talking about. But if you can make it real and in front of them and not even fully functional, but just the teaser where it starts to become real, you see the light goes off. And, I remember maybe a year and a half ago, there was this functionality that we really wanted to build on the marketing side that needed a browser extension. And I was trying to get it prioritized and the engineering team we had dedicated to it just kind of kept, never made it above the fold. And then finally I went out and used some of the tools you talked about. And I think this is before a lot of them came out. So I was using just ChatGPT and whatever, and threw together a thing that got 80% of the way of almost functioning, but they could start to see some of it, but they also could see where it broke and where it didn't work. And then it became, oh, we can knock this out. We can do a better version of that. This makes total sense, versus having to envision, like, how do we do that? And why would we even do that in the first place? Once you kind of saw it, it just became, oh, we can fix that. That's easy. And I get why it's necessary. So I do feel like that kind of making it real is an important step for some people to move it forward.
Yeah, for sure. And there's certainly the art of delivery too. It's like walking into an engineering team and saying, here's my Git repo for this feature is probably not the right approach. They want to build, they want to do their job. They don't want to have their job taken away by a product manager. But going in there with the right approach, like I wanted to paint a picture of how we could approach this problem, how we could solve it. This isn't the code. This isn't, to your point, production worthy. That's not what I was trying to achieve. I was trying to achieve better storytelling. That's useful in kind of bringing down their guard so they can have a much more engaged conversation.
I actually wonder, even, I'm sure you've heard about this, it's kind of all over the place now, about someone brought up the way to get information on something like Reddit is not to ask a question, but it's almost to like make a statement that's wrong about the subject that you're trying to get the answer on. And then just everyone will come out of the woodwork to tell you that you're wrong, or maybe, set up two profiles and ask the question, then put the wrong answer right away. And everyone will come out and you'll get the right answer that way much faster than if you just ask the question. And almost, is this a corollary rule to that? If you just ask for the feature to be built or worked on, it's tough to get it. But once you kind of show it and you don't do a production ready job, like, I could do this. Let me fix it now.
Us humans are awfully good at pointing out the faults of others. So putting out the proposed answer and being okay with accepting people saying that's wrong, it does take some courage, some strength to do that. And I think that's why sometimes people don't do that. They're like afraid of getting that criticism. But to your point, and actually, I just walked out of a strategy discussion this morning with our product and engineering team. And we were going through some product strategy, and there was a paragraph that was a little bit too open-ended. It left a lot of room for the interpretation for the reader, so they could kind of walk away with whatever they wanted to get from that paragraph. And I said, no, we should just make this clear statement. It's very specific. It cuts off a whole swath of the market, and it may be the wrong answer, but let's get better engagement with this paragraph, this set of words, by putting out an answer, whether right or wrong. And in your case, maybe sometimes it's put the wrong answer, just to get people to focus in and providing better feedback and engagement.
I think kind of make this real again. We kind of got to catch up a little bit a week or two ago. Ezine Adeswe, I know she was over at WP Engine for a while, and you worked with her there. So we have that common friend, and she kind of gave topics and background on you, and so I have a little more context. But I think you brought this up actually over at PubNub. There's a great example of this kind of around making it real. Peloton early on did really well because they were able to kind of like make it more community based and who's online and who are you with and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like you were, maybe a bit involved in bringing that to fruition while you're at PubNub.
Yeah, at PubNub, so real-time communication platform, think location tracking, chat, that's a type of capability or set of APIs. And our customers, Peloton, actually early days of the pandemic, of course, Peloton all the rage.
Oh yeah.
And they were having a desire to basically, if you're on the bike, you're seeing who else is riding and where you are relative position. Are you like at the end of the pack? Are you the leader? So that leaderboard functionality is a great way for people to engage, think about where they're doing and gaining more momentum and ambition. Peloton had a desire to provide a capability to allow the filtering of that list. So there's 10,000 people on a ride. I don't want to see all 10,000. I want to know how am I doing relative to 50 plus men in San Francisco, for example. So taking basically a real-time leaderboard and reducing it to just what I'm interested in that moment in time. Seems rather straightforward and definitely yielded great results for Peloton. At PubNub, it was, okay, how do we take that capability and then translate it into action, into the product? Using a similar type of technique, sketching out what we thought the API would look like, how the Peloton would be using it, and then using that as an artifact to communicate with engineering. Just another example of kind of painting the picture in a tangible way to quickly get to the result that we're looking at for the customer.
Well, it's so interesting because I feel like a lot of innovation kind of comes from that piece, right? Part of it is you need to show 0 to 1 as possible. And once you've hit 0 to 1, 1 to 10 is just an optimization project almost at that point, right? Like you need to make the code production ready. You need to make sure it's secure. You need to do all those things where you can, sell it to people. But 0 to 1, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to paint the picture and show the functionality. On our end, we have kind of a similar idea where, we do session replay analytics. And a big problem with all of that has been, how do you parse through, WP Engine must have millions and millions of users every month and sessions every month. You're not going to watch, no matter what tool you use. I don't know what tool you use, but you're not going to watch every session there. But there's a ton of information baked in that. But how could you possibly parse it down into just the things that are interesting? How can you bring that forward intelligently? And that was the same thing. And early on, it was a lot of taking data sets on our end, but also manually parsing stuff and finding out how that worked, and then finding out the rules and the levels and what are the thresholds. And that was quickly able to be, turned by engineering into scalable and that 1 to 10 and 10 to 100 product. But early on, it was kind of, a couple people who maybe weren't necessarily production level engineers, but they were making it work and showing it was possible. So then you could take it and drive it forward into automated, AI based and all of that. But you had to kind of build the foundation first that way and a little bit more manual, the structure.
I love this train of thought here because it does speak to one of the great values I'm getting out of AI right now, which is, I know it's weird to say, like my conversation with the AI, my collaboration with the AI. And I'm not just taking whatever the AI is spitting out always and just, putting it out there into the world and say, that's the truth. But at the same time, it's the ability to kind of get into the sausage making of whatever you're trying to do, building a proof of concept or building that picture, that 0 to 1 kind of solution, and learning a lot just by doing, making a mistake. And the feedback loop becomes a lot tighter, a lot quicker. And that's one of the great values I'm seeing right now in my day-to-day AI work, is just being able to have that messy sausage making process that I learned from, that I can then adapt my own vision towards having that happen much, much more quickly.
Exactly. I think the more people who can help make the sausage and get involved probably get better product in the end. Then the other kind of, I think, thing that kind of guides this is there is just so much happening in AI. So it's one thing that more people are going to be able to start building, right? You're going to definitely be able to move faster. More people are going to help make that sausage. But there's also just every day, I guess, so many different new sausage makers being thrown at us. And one thing to keep in mind through all of this is, how do you keep kind of focus on like what is core product mission? How do we make sure we're not just building something to build it? I heard one person talk recently about, in their role as an engineer, they're actually finding themselves building less things, not more now because it's easier, because they're thinking through the kind of next steps of like, how will this go? How will I move it forward? How will I 1 to 10 it, not just build it and see what happens, which is interesting. But you kind of had an experience here that I think helps with mastering this idea of focus and speed. You were at Mashery, went through a series of acquisitions, and what kind of came out the other end is a great lesson in focus and time to execution and just keeping up speed, and good things can happen.
Yeah, definitely. It was great to go through a successful exit, Mashery to Intel. But of course, Mashery was a small, I think it was like 200 person software startup, SaaS platform. Intel, obviously much bigger. And there was definitely some clash there of culture, if you will. Intel had this wonderful vision that Mashery was a small part of, hence the acquisition. And they would come in and pull our architects off, key engineers off, to go work on this vision that was more just proof of concept than anything else. And so we had a lot of uncertainty, a lot of churn, if you will, on teams, as people were pulled in and out of the core Mashery business. And, that created challenges for us, especially as a product organization. Could we build, or what should we build? How can we get the velocity that we need? What is going to happen to Mashery? What's going to happen to our customers? So lots of uncertainty and confusion and chaos to a certain extent. And there it was really, I know it sounds straightforward, but it's like getting back to the basics. Like, what are the problems are we solving? For whom are we solving them? Why does it matter that we solve those problems? So just kind of get the product management core, what I would call, at least at Mashery, it was the beating heart of the company. Every group is important, but product was such a strong function. And so having the PM team be confident and strong was really important to helping the rest of the organization. So first up was to get the PMs, just, again, aligned back to basics. What are the problems that we're solving? Why are they important to be solved? And then how are we going to solve them? And then communication. That was really the second piece of the puzzle, which was, as the beating heart, at least for Mashery, strong product management function, we had to be visible. We had to be overly visible, for lack of a better phrase, but make sure that we weren't just hiding because we ourselves were uncertain and had lots of doubts. We had to be reaching out to folks, both internally and externally. So adhering to our rhythm of how we were communicating on a regular basis, whether it's via Slack, via email, weekly webinars or presentations, just being active was another piece of the puzzle of kind of maintaining the strength of Mashery. And then the third piece, I think, was just being people-centric. Again, pretty obvious, but I think even more important these days. I have some mistakes in there too. We were perhaps in some cases too people-centric, trying to keep teams focused on a feature that we had decided to invest in a year prior, when we should have revisited that decision, but we were just too scared to make too much change in the organization. So just let that team go. That was a mistake, but just generally being there for people was just really important to getting us to weather the storm, if you will, of this uncertain period. We came out at the opposite end, in a good place as we were divested or moved across to TIBCO, an old school enterprise application platform. And so again, those PM basics, communication, and people centricity were the three ingredients I think that really helped us weather that period at Mastery, at Intel.
It makes sense. And then, going to TIBCO, it's interesting because I'd wager everyone thinks big company, probably same problems, but at some level, new problems, different problems, still problems. And I'm curious, I've been through that too. I've been at the company that was acquired by a company that was multiple X bigger than us, to the point where they didn't even have to report us on their public disclosures necessarily, because it was such an immaterial thing to their revenue. And going in and just realizing kind of speed of delivery is expected to be slower. And how do you kind of square that mindset? These startup people you've brought with you who are used to, move fast, because it's move fast or die a lot of the time at a startup. And how do you kind of push that forward? But also, what can we learn from that in kind of this new world where maybe you can't take 2 years to ship a small feature?
Yeah, that's for sure. And definitely, TIBCO was a much better home for Mastery.
Yeah.
We could say APIs, and they would know what APIs were. They had a different view of APIs. Again, they were more on-prem software. They were just starting to get into the cloud-based business. And we were 100% software as a service, and just completely different mindset of releasing features on a weekly basis that would be actually visible and usable by customers. And I think that one powerful lesson to take is going faster doesn't always result in success. Sometimes you got to move slow in order to provide value to customers. And I think being thoughtful about how you invest is super important, especially in the AI era, where I believe that trust in systems will become that much more important. Like if something is failing, it gets me from 0 to 1 like that, and then falls over when it goes to 2 and 3 and 4 and beyond. I think there will be fatigue around that. And so investing appropriately in robust systems as needed becomes really important. And why I bring that up is, I think one of the key attributes of a cloud-based platform, a software as a service, infrastructure as a service, whatever, is this notion of an incident or an outage. When they happen out there in the cloud, it's not so much fun because customers can't get access to the application. They're not getting the value that you sold them on. And about a year into our TIBCO relationship, our TIBCO era, if you will, we started having many more big incidents. Like we had I call it the year of incidents, where I think
it's a long time to be a period of incidents.
Oh, it was intense. I think my wife was very concerned about my health, as lots of weekends were spent trying to run incident rooms and resolve issues for some big customers who were losing, millions upon millions of dollars during this time frame. And I think it came down to trying to get more attention from TIBCO, who did step up to want to say, okay, how do we invest differently in this platform? And this is where it came down to framing the problem up correctly. Hey, TIBCO execs, we have customers like Starbucks who are losing tens of millions of dollars each day that we're down. That's super important to us, but also really important to them, obviously. Using data strategically. So I remember putting together a chart of API traffic along with amount of R&D investment. So people time that were investing in the platform. And at the beginning of Mastery, API traffic or usage of our product goes up and up and up, and R&D spend goes up and up and up because we're trying to grow the business. And then we got picked up by Intel. API traffic or usage of the platform continues to go up, but our investment in the platform plateaus and then starts to decline. And so you can kind of see that quite clearly, the growth of the platform against the decline or diminished investment. And then we could start layering in the incidents that were happening. And it was this wonderful picture, data-based, that was eye-opening for us all, saying, hey, we went through a period of non-investment or diminished investment, and that has now led to the fraying of our platform and incidents that are having severe business impact for our customers. Here's what we need to do. So the solution becomes quite clear, and just being clear on the solution was just as important as framing up the problem with supporting data. It's here's what we need to do. We need to hunker down. We need to fix our processes. We need to regain lost knowledge as people have left post acquisition, ultimately really focusing on the stability of the platform as opposed to building new features or responding to one-off requests from classic enterprise customers. So that was an example, I think, of going slower, if you will. We're taking a step back and pausing and really focusing on our platform. But that's not every day. And this is where the equal example of just looking at what we're trying to do, many different enhancements, adding simple forms on a field, simple forms on a page, ended up taking weeks upon weeks upon weeks, just way too long. And in this era of AI, especially, any company that takes a long time to do simple features, I think is not going to be around for too long. There are some complex things that just take longer time under infrastructure management, distributed systems, but not everything requires that. And I think having this mix of where to spend your time, when to go slow and when to go fast becomes that much more important in this day of AI.
Although I'm going to push back on you a little bit here, just in that it doesn't sound like necessarily the value came from moving slow. It came from speed. Doesn't have to be about shipping feature that are all public facing. Like those issues that were causing, Starbucks to lose tens of millions of dollars a day. You wanted to fix those behind the scenes problems fast. It just might not result in something that was visibly changed to the end user. You weren't shipping a new feature, a new capability. I would argue it's probably behooves you to solve that problem quickly as causing that problem for Starbucks.
Yeah.
And that comes down to, right, like being, like you said, clear on the problem, clear on what you want the outcome to be. And then in that world, still, bureaucracies are going to kill your ability to do it. If you have to go through 5 or 6 or 8 people who have to approve how you're going to fix that problem, if you're going to argue about what does fixed really mean, and I say this because I've had these conversations at bigger companies before when we're like, well, let's fix it. Well, let's define first what fixed means. And like, maybe we can fit it into like these points, and that's the wrong team to work on that. And you run into all these things where, yes, you want to take the time to assess and do the right work. And it might not always look like you are flying forward, but you still want to accomplish these things that you're moving quickly, even if it's not the typical move fast and break things and ship feature all the time kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you so much for pushing back, because I do think it's not a question of going slower. That sort of platform work is always going to be perceived as going slow by people on the platform. If you read platforms, you're like, hey, actually, you could be going very, very fast, but still making small changes over time simply by nature of the beast of how big that platform is. But yeah, working intentionally, aggressively towards solving customer problems, even if they're back-end platform issues, is super, super important.
Or I mentioned Desway earlier, but her husband, Aji, who I know really well as well, I think he's brought up the idea before of like when he was at Twitter, the idea came about being able to edit posted tweets, which seems like a very simple, just let me edit the tweet that I just posted. Why is that so hard? It seems like a pretty simple, just turn the permission on. And in reality, it was the way a lot of the architecture had been done over, 36 or more different submodules, was that these were indelibly written not to be edited because of how it had to interact with other systems. And so, you can move quickly and check off system 1, subsystem 2, subsystem, and maybe you're moving quickly through 36 or whatever number it was subsystems, but changing what is perceived to be one little thing might take a while. So what I always kind of push here on is let's move quickly and show that we're making progress, and at least extol internally we need to move quickly through all these things. It might not always look externally. Like you said, there's sometimes big feature sets that you need to move slowly externally looking because there's a lot going on, or a really highly sensitive system that you want to be very careful about security or durability of data. But once you kind of know what you're doing, let's not waste our time with stupid decisions that we know that's the right thing to do kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, one of the things just kind of sparked the recent work here at WP Engine, where we've spent considerable amount of time improving our platform to match the expectations of our customers around performance and scale in this modern era. And there's been a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and if they're successful, which is great, but to your point of like laying out the plan and communicating the progress against that plan is really effective, even if it's not the the fun little shiny ball feature that everyone's going to get excited about, a rational laid out plan that people are moving against and can show progress and people are supportive of. And I would argue people both on product and engineering that can corroborate the complexity. I think that's important too, so that people understand that even though it's a small little visible change on the front end, this is why it's going to take 6 months. We're aggressively moving towards the problem or solving the problem, but it still takes 6 months because of these reasons. And here's how we've broken out the plan, and here's our progress. At WP Engine, that's been working so successfully in getting everyone on board with these types of major investments that improve customer experience, but not necessarily in a shiny ball, visible type of way.
When I was younger, I ran track, and this is one of those times I kind of harken back to. I feel like there's certain areas where it doesn't have to be sports, it can be different activities, but something you're competitive about and has kind of organized structure to that competition is just so helpful from a framing of knowing this. Because looking back, right, when I have just run for running's sake and for, being in shape, I'll generally just go jog a couple miles, and that is what it is. But when I had races lined up or things I was competing on, and the metaphor would be to having a big goal or capability you're shipping towards for a product, you're willing to do those kind of not fun, hard kind of eat your vegetables things. Like you're going to do the sprint workouts, you're going to do the hill workout. If you know you have a certain race or a certain competition where you need to be at a certain level, same if you're shipping the product, you're going to do the back end, maybe database cleanup work or the other things that are not that fun, but they're going to make the product capable of handling this really cool capability. But if you don't have that big goal, eating your vegetables kind of activities just feel like eating steamed broccoli. And that is disgusting.
I 100% agree with you. Whenever my wife cooks steamed broccoli, I'm like, what are you doing with corn here?
But it's really healthy for you.
Exactly. So she's not killing me, but anyway,
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
Not tasty.
I do want to hit one thing because I think you've had some cool experience, and this, we promised everyone that this would wrap into this kind of meta lesson. And it is, now we live in a world where we're being sold 25 sausage makers a day. There's just a different AI solution coming out every day. But also, like, the expectation is you can ship your own stuff. The contribution level that people can have is so much higher to prove that kind of 0 to 1, or to prove the storytelling, or to make the point that this is something we should work on, or, to make the wrong statement, even so someone can come in and correct you versus have to go 0 to 1. You're at WP Engine. It's just such a great exposure to so much of the web there. Like, how are you there, using AI with a team? So not necessarily even in the product, but just with your team. How do you, within the workflows, use it? How do you enable your team to also kind of move forward? Use it? How do you move with speed? It's not all about playing with the new shiny toys. It's how you're using this to be, better, faster, stronger kind of stuff.
Yeah. To have us eat our vegetables.
Yeah. How do you eat your broccoli over at WP Engine?
Yeah, exactly. I think as you were describing that, I think there's part of that, for me at least, it's lowering the barrier to entry. And there are tasks that I need to do, that we all have to do, that are eating our vegetables. And it's just like, I've got to go to this site on our intranet to get this form, to download it, to fill it out, to whatever it is. There's always steps to doing something. And in many ways, I think AI removes a lot of those steps. And whether it's, doing things that I may not want to do, like perhaps in-depth competitive intelligence gathering, or some data querying, or I want to put together a small proof of concept of something, like it just feels like the barrier to entry to get going has been dramatically lowered. And that's what I've been trying to do more and more, is just leverage AI tools to get me going and engaged in the problem and work towards a solution much more quickly than before. And that's kind of a mindset we're trying to get more and more into the heads or the minds of our product managers. We're still early on in our kind of collective use of AI here at WP Engine from a product management perspective. We have other parts of the business, like our support team, that is using AI heavily to improve the service or level of support that we deliver our customers. From a kind of a product management perspective, it's still early days. Think of that more as shadow IT. People are using their tools of choice. They're exploring ChatGPT and Claude and Lovable and Bolt and Cursor and so on and so forth. All sorts of tools out there. We are in the process of helping them get beyond just shadow IT. And this is where, we're at a moment where it's good to have, your own spend perhaps to play with it, Not everyone can afford to get, more advanced plans. So let's give them access to the right set of tools that we think will help them. Tools like Claude and ChatGPT, among some others, getting them the support and the time to invest so people can know that they can actually spend the time and use these tools in different ways, whether creating product briefs, creating the stories that get fit into Jira, doing that query for product usage analysis.
Mhm.
It's okay to do that. And I think the third area that we're focusing on is providing examples. So I talked about access, I talked about support. It's the examples of what you can do with these things. And I've been trying to do this more and more on my end. It sometimes could be weird for a VP of product to create a product brief. And my point is to not take their jobs away from them at all. It's hey, I'm using AI as part of my process. Part of this product brief is half Jeremy and half Claude, or 75% Jeremy and 25% Claude, or whatever it is. Not just show the finished artifact, but actually starting to show the steps that I went through. In this case, I typically use Visual Studio Code plus Klein. I'm a big fan of that world, but just going through the steps of here are the prompts I used, here's the back and forth I went through. And it may not be the right way to do it. It may not be the perfect way to do it, but showing the example of what can be done and how to approach it, especially through higher level leadership, and saying it's okay to do that. We can be vulnerable in our journey here, and here are the mistakes, here are the successes, and together we'll learn how to do this most effectively over time. That seems to be really taking root here at WP Engine. And I think why it is because every company has a great culture. I get it. WP Engine, I think, is a special place. And we're so focused on the people, both ourselves and our customers, that this kind of the human centricity of the AI world is that much more important. We're all navigating the implications of AI, both for our customers and for ourselves. And approaching it from that human-centric way, I think, is also being quite effective because it speaks to our values and people feel less scared in jumping into AI.
Can you maybe talk about like any specific, what's something cool that someone has figured out that, has saved time or been maybe better output for the same amount of time from being able to do all this?
So huge impact that we're seeing is in the search space. So we have a new product out there. It's been out there for quite some time called WP Engine Smart Search. And it's an AI-driven search engine, if you will, that can be integrated with our customer sites. And when comparing to out-of-the-box search from WordPress and third-party bolt-ons, we're seeing dramatically improved performance on-site search, especially in those situations where the visitors are not exactly inputting information, in the right way. They're misspelling. They're not quite remembering what they're looking for, so they're being a little bit vague in their search input terms. Typically, in the past, that would result in no results or inaccurate results. With AI-driven search, we're seeing much more effective search performance, especially for e-com type sites where people are wanting to get to the product in question. That's from a kind of a product market-facing value that we've created using AI. Internally, from a process perspective, it's more around the creation of product briefs. These are the high-level investment thesis, if you will, that we kind of start off with any major investment. And what was taking week, 2 weeks can now be done in single-digit hours, and that's the rough forming of the thesis, the problem. Not worrying so much about language and structure of the document, but using kind of more raw formed thoughts, well thought out. You can't just not think. But this kind of new process of creating these high level product briefs goes from many, many weeks of trying to get the right energy, trying to get the right perspectives, trying to get the time to actually do the writing that you want to share with your fellow product managers, to something that is much more quick to get it to a V1 that is worthy of a review by using AI to take your thoughts, engage in a collaborative feedback loop and edit loop, and then get to a V1 again within single digit hours as opposed to single digit weeks.
I have talked to so many people kind of across the country now about how teams are using AI, and especially product teams, because that's kind of where I spend a lot of my time with. And writing comes down to it because it's such a huge part of how we communicate. Because one thing to talk, and I think it's a great way for ideas to free flow, is to speak, right? But at some level or at some point, you need that durably recorded in a way that can be referenced back. I feel like you and I can have a conversation and we can walk away going, oh yeah, I mean, Jeremy's on the same page with me. We're simpatico. We get what's going on. We have the same idea here. But in reality, it's very easy to speak to each other and come away and think we're on the same page and really be, maybe 15 degrees off. When you write it down and people read it and get it, I feel like it's a much more, you either get it or you don't. And if you don't get it, it's gonna be very clear that we're not on the same page. And just across the board, I've seen so many people talk about, how do you write more clearly? How do you more quickly write? How do you take a lot of information and condense it down into just the really, really salient written points really fast? And then how do you interpret that? Like you said, then how do you search across that? I mean, even as far as doing these podcasts, it used to take, I don't know, 8-10 hours for each episode to like prepare for it and get everything together. And a lot of that was just, in your case, it would have been going through everything you've ever written on LinkedIn, everything published in the past couple of years about WP Engine, and kind of trying to parse that together in the context of some things we talked about, a couple of weeks back. And now we're able to use a couple agents to kind of feed that together. You still need the taste level, right? We still need to, just people know, like before we recorded this a couple of weeks ago, we got on a phone call with you and our producer M and myself, and we talked through stuff. And we kind of had an idea of story structures, and we still do the human level of talking through how we're going to make this work. But to go out and fill in the color around that, we're able to do that 20 times faster now and really make sure. And it doesn't do the work for us, but it does the grunt work. It does the sanity checking. It makes sure I didn't miss an important point that we talked about. It makes sure that there's maybe an angle out there in the world that we could discuss. I think it's made for a much more rich discourse, and I have more time to kind of focus on doing this well versus just going and reading a bunch of LinkedIn posts.
Yeah, and it's great. I love it. And it's at least for PMs, I think about collaboration. I think of my AI as my partner. Again, I'm not deferring to them. And I put together a Gamma presentation. Gamma is awesome for presentations from kind of AI driven content. And it was just about my own journey. And one of the key points I made was hey, if you're going to have to present, if you're going to have to be in a meeting and defend that document, you better be engaged in the process of developing that content for that document. You can't just do a prompt, produce a product brief, and then call it done. It's in that loop of editing and exploration. I still feel like you can create good written content from a communication perspective, but also use the writing process, which I think is really just as important to refine your thinking and approach, and you get more invested in the problem that you're trying to solve. And if you lose that as a PM, you're going to fail miserably in that product brief defense meeting, because you'll be like, I don't know, the AI wrote it. Yeah. It's not going to flow off the tip of your tongue as you go to talk about the details.
Right. You can't just kind of hand off responsibility. But at the same time, I feel like product people, more than almost anyone else, have just this like Frankenstack of places where you have data and context and information, and just it takes so much time to get across and understand any singular thing that, they can do a lot to help you there pull it together, but you have to bring the experience and the taste and the understanding to put it together and finalize it. So it's not going to do your job for you, but it can help you do the parts that are the broccoli. I could keep you here all day. Thank you so much for coming on, Jeremy. It was a pleasure. If people want to reach out, they want to ask questions about AI, how you guys are using it, or they have, thoughts maybe about what they've seen work really well, is LinkedIn the best place, or is there a better place to reach out?
LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, Jeremy.Pollock, or if you want to send me an email, go old school at Jeremy.Pollock@WP Engine. I'm more than happy to engage on email as well.
Nice. Awesome. Going old school. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, for joining. I think there's some things I want to talk to you about down the line. So maybe we have it back on in a few months. We see how things are going, but appreciate this. This was a blast. I love getting into it. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. And it was better than broccoli.
It's a high compliment. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Bye.